I once held a hunting lease in Middle Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place I've ever been to. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it was not uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open, even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story is about. One evening, I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot. From the minute I sat down, I had a weird feeling, like I wasn't in a safe place even though I was holding a .308 with ballistic-tipped rounds. I didn't feel like I was the top predator out there. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting on the stand, but the forest was abuzz with activity. Birds, squirrels, and other critters singing their normal evening symphony. And then all of the sudden, silence. Everything just stopped. It felt like everything in the woods was looking right at me. It was getting dark fast anyways, and I was extremely creeped out, so I packed up my gear and started the walk back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the path towards the food plot, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look like a deer or anything I've seen before. There was hardly any light to make out any features, but it almost looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something. It was just standing there, staring at me. I quickly made my way back to the cabin, packed up my stuff, and got out of there. I just let the lease run out. Never went back after that. I believe this happened about 2 years ago now, so forgive me if there's some blank spaces in my thinking. I was about 15 or 16 at the time and relaxing in my room at night, watching YouTube, reading fanfics, as teen girls do. I was just messing around on my phone, not caring about much else, when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I turned to look to my open doorway, which is where I thought I saw something, and just barely through the darkness I saw my dad's blackened figure. I froze. Through the darkness, I could tell it was my dad, but it was strange. It didn't move, not even a little. It just stood there silently and motionless. And now that I look back on it, something else has hit me as well. I have a lot of string lights that are always on in my room because I've always been afraid of the dark. The soft yellow lights usually cast out through my doorway, pouring into the rest of the house a bit. The figure was standing in direct target of the light, yet it remained black. I stared at it for quite some time, expecting my dad to go, "What?" at any second so we could have a laugh about it. But that never happened. Instead, only a deafening silence filled the air. I'm really not sure why I did what I did next. I must have been overtired, therefore, not fully processing what was happening. I looked away for a second to put my phone down. When I looked back up, it was gone. I'm not sure how, but I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, my parents and my brother were all chatting in the dining room, making breakfast and such. I went to my dad almost immediately and told him about what happened the night before, asking him if it was indeed him. He asked me what time this happened, and I told him probably around 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. I think we all have internal clocks. So that's kind of what I based my answer on, although I know they're obviously not always accurate, so I could have been wrong. My dad gave me a confused and somewhat concerned look, and told me he only got up around his usual 4 a.m. to feed our cats and dog. Yeah, I know waking up at 4 a.m. to do that sounds weird, but it's seriously something both my parents have always done. Sometimes hearing them, I'll wake up and go out to get a drink of water and talk with them. But anyway, hearing this definitely creeped me out. I have never known my dad to be a sleepwalker, so even that option didn't seem to fit. Yet I know that it was his figure that had been standing in my doorway the previous night. The morning went on, and eventually I found myself outside, hanging out in our driveway. I don't really remember what I was doing, however. I remember looking down the hill where the main road is and seeing my dad walking down it. I was confused, as he's not really the up-and-go-walk kind of guy. I tried shouting down to him to get his attention, but he just kept walking until he was out of sight. But just then, I kid you not, my dad pops out of our chicken coop, having just finished taking care of their water and food for the day. I looked at him, now completely freaked out, and told him what I had just seen. He seemed almost equally as concerned, probably not only for what I told him, but for my well-being too. We both went inside, and the day went on. Thankfully, I've never experienced anything like this again, and I hope it stays that way. I have no idea what those things were that I saw or why I was seeing them. I've been known to occasionally hallucinate at night when I'm overtired, but I can't recall any events around those days that could have made me that exhausted. I'm also not one to believe in the supernatural, but I'm also having a hard time coming up with a plausible explanation for these events. I feel that there must be an explanation somewhere, but it's certainly not one that I know. We had these ice cream vendors who would cruise around on motorcycles with tubs of ice cream in a sidecar. Often they'd even give kids rides home as a way to encourage parents to buy their treats. Some of these guys were really kind, especially the ones who got to know you and would occasionally hand out a free ice cream bar. One time, when I was in 4th grade, I was waiting for my parents to pick me up from school. Most of the other kids had already gone home, but my parents were late because they had just returned from work and it was pouring rain due to the monsoon season. Living on the East Coast, I was used to this kind of weather, but that day the streets were completely flooded. I'm pretty sure I ended up catching a cold from it. No one in their right mind would ride a motorcycle in such heavy rain, except, of course, the ice cream guy. I noticed that this wasn't the usual vendor who came after school, but a different one. I'd seen him around the neighborhood a few times. He spotted me and gestured for me to come over and hop in the sidecar, offering to take me home. Even as a kid, I sensed something was off. He was almost too friendly, and I didn't like it. I stayed under the roof near the security guard, just like my parents had taught me. Despite me telling him I was waiting for my parents, he kept urging me to go with him. Then, to my surprise, he got off his bike, stepping out into the pouring rain just to come closer. Alarmed, I bolted to the guardhouse, ignoring the downpour, hoping he'd stop following me. I told the guard that the ice cream man was acting strange, and luckily, the guard chased him away, warning him not to return to the school grounds. After that, I never saw him at school again, at least until I moved to the city. It's unsettling how far some people will go to try to get someone to go with them, no matter the cost. I was especially vulnerable being alone, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts and got away in time. I have a background in healthcare, along with a certification I rarely use, although I keep renewing it. Anyway, I signed up to volunteer almost immediately, thinking I'd assist people affected by Katrina. However, that wasn't the case. A few of us were assigned to a very different task after the waters began to recede. Locating houses with deceased individuals inside. If you've ever dealt with body recovery after someone has been left in heat and floodwater for days, even weeks, you know the odor. It's like the smell of any decomposing animal. But worse, almost sickly sweet. It's hard to describe. The trick to not vomiting from the stench is rubbing Vicks under your nose. It doesn't block out everything, but it helps make the smell somewhat bearable. We had to visit every house, wading through in our boots, searching for bodies. Many people had been swept out to sea, but some remained in their homes. If we discovered a body, we'd spray paint a large X on the house exterior. I was paired with another volunteer, let's call him Mike, and we worked together nearly every day. We got along fine, and luckily, he wasn't fazed by even the most disturbing scenes. One day, we arrived at an old, dilapidated house in a rough neighborhood. It was the kind of place that gave me instant chills. Not just the dread of finding a body, but a deep, unsettling feeling, like something was really wrong. Some areas of New Orleans have an eerie vibe, and I knew that voodoo was practiced in certain places. Despite my gut screaming at me to turn back, we went inside. The first thing that hit me was the overwhelming smell of decomposition, followed by the musty scent of mold and earth. I glanced at Mike, and he looked pale. He felt it too. As we moved further in, we noticed strange objects, bones, which I'm pretty sure were from cats, beads, and odd carvings on the wooden walls. It was clear that something bizarre had taken place in this house. In the kitchen we found her. An elderly woman, or what was left of her, chained by the wrists to a beam. Her insides were spilling onto the floor. The creepiest part? Her face looked almost alive, with a twisted grin and jagged, worn-down teeth. My skin crawled, and I felt goosebumps all over as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this eerie, otherworldly laughter. It was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. My instincts kicked in, and Jay and I bolted out of there. We quickly marked the house with an X and ran to the next one. I don't know if that woman had been involved in voodoo or something else, but the experience left me shaken to my core. It still haunts my dreams. I can't imagine how the crew that had to remove her coped with it. That night, back at the hotel, Mike and I talked it over. He'd heard the same creepy laughter, but we both tried to brush it off as the wind or something else. Still, neither of us could shake how terrifying it was. In late September, the year was 2008. The Gulf Coast had seen its fair share of hurricanes, but none like Alara,